Good morning, and thank you for coming. I'm Scott Ross, the Executive Director of One Wisconsin Now. We're a progressive advocacy organization based out of Madison. I do want to let you know and remind you that exits are in the back and the front of the cabin, and be reminded that sometimes the exit closest to you may be the one behind you. So, September 21st, 2005 was probably the worst day in Scott Walker's political career. He stood in a room in the hotel, Edgewater, and announced that he was dropping his 71-day bid for president. A reminder that the day he dropped out, he was polling in the presidential race at 0.0, meaning that is within the margin of error for every single person in this room. Some of you from time to time will write stories about what's called the Marquette poll. Marquette poll that was released a week after Scott Walker dropped out of the race, 9/21/15, showed that his approval rating was at a dismal 37%. Scott Walker had a political problem. And as a 25-year career politician, Scott Walker came up with a political solution to that, to rehab his image. Now, we're going to release a bunch of stuff today, documented information, but I think that we best should go and let Scott Walker himself talk about what his intent was. In a radio interview from way back July 24th, 2018, Scott Walker said on WTAQ radio, "Our approval ratings were really low back then because not just Democrats who have had their usual frustrations with us, but even some Republican-leaning voters had felt like we should have stayed focused in Wisconsin." Well, we did. For 2.5, almost 3 years now, we traveled the state. I want to go back to 2009 when Scott Walker first ran for governor. You may remember TV ads that he produced in which he was driving in a 1998 Saturn, a used 1998 Saturn, talking about and touting his ham sandwiches in brown paper bags to highlight his everymanism. Well, after 25 years in office, 8 years in the governor's mansion, and running for president where billionaires were flying him literally around the world on their private planes, Scott Walker no longer has the slogan, "I'm the brown bag guy." Scott Walker's new slogan is, "I'll fly, you buy." We have a comprehensive cataloging of all this travel that Scott Walker has done on the state plane at taxpayer expense since September 21st, 2005. And since dropping out of the presidential race and attempting to rehabilitate his image, he has made an astonishing 869 flights in those 951 days for a total of 114,390 miles, and most importantly and most appallingly, at an expense of $818,497 in taxpayer funds. Our research director, Joanna Beilman-Doolin, who was in charge of this project, is going to run through some of the numbers, and then we're going to allow Savian and Louise to offer some thoughts that they have as well.
Thanks, Scott. So earlier this year, we made a request for flight records to the governor's administration, and once we finally got those records back, which always takes us a little bit longer, I think, we created a database. We took those records that we got and we put them into a spreadsheet, and we lined them up with the governor's public press releases from his governor's office, as well as his tweets from his official account and his campaign account. Luckily for us in this endeavor, he tweets as much as, if not more than, Donald Trump, so we had a lot to work with. What we were reminded of, and what he is working hard to remind people of or make them think, is that he is a regular guy. We're all familiar with his tweets of his sandwiches and other such things, but what we really realized was that couldn't be farther from the truth. If that was once the case, it certainly is not now. I want to walk through just a couple of highlights of particularly outrageous trips that Governor Walker took using state planes paid for with our state tax dollars. On September 26, 2015, the very first state plane flight that Governor Walker took after dropping out of the race for president, Governor Walker and the First Lady flew on a weekend to Green Bay and back to attend Justice Crooks's funeral. Going to the funeral, of course, makes a lot of sense, but using a state plane to fly on a weekend made a lot more sense when we realized that he was tweeting about attending the Badger game that night. On November 1st, 2016, you'll recognize this is just about a week before the 2016 election day. The governor flew to Menominee, Wisconsin and back for what we could tell was an invite-only listening session so that he could then return to Eau Claire later that day to participate in a campaign rally with then-candidate Donald Trump. On October 9th, 2017, Governor Walker again flew on a state plane from Madison to West Bend, where he visited a business, and then sent the state plane back without him, which is just sort of outrageous, we think. The cost for that particular flight was $438.39, a flight from Madison to West Bend to drop him off. We also noticed an interesting category, what we're calling double dipping, whether this is places so nice he visited them twice in one day, or places where he flew to the same place 2 days in a row, back-to-back days. To give an example of this one, May 18th of 2017, Governor Walker flew to Eau Claire, where he visited a local school and flew back to Madison. The next day, May 19th, 2017, he again flew to Eau Claire to attend a groundbreaking ceremony and flew back to Madison. We also saw, while we were reviewing his tweets, that the governor likes to tweet out photos of books that he's reading with his reading buddy. Now, we're certainly not in opposition to having a reading buddy and helping a kid learn to read, but when you're making 4 separate flights from Madison to Milwaukee and then tweeting that out, it doesn't rub us, it seems not appropriate. You know, how many of us don't fly to Milwaukee but drive to Milwaukee, and that sort of disparity between using the state plane but just trying to seem like a normal guy really rubbed us the wrong way. I also want to highlight some of the family adventures that were taken on the state plane. On August 31st, 2017, Governor Walker was distributing plaques to supper clubs around the state, but made sure to bring the First Lady with him as he flew to the last one at the Pinewood Supper Club in central Wisconsin, because, you know, if you have the ability, why not use that as a date night? The most egregious, I think, in this category, though, was May 9th of 2017. Governor Walker and Mrs. Walker took a state plane from Madison to Port Washington to do a Walk with Walker event. They flew the plane to take a walk. But the one that really wraps it up for me, just in terms of the general outrageousness of these flights, February 6th of 2016, the governor tweeted out a photo that morning that he was getting his hair cut in Wauwatosa. What wasn't as clear to the public, but we know now, is that he had a state plane come and fetch him in Wauwatosa to fly him to central Wisconsin to attend an NRA convention. These are just some of the highlights, or the lowlights really, of the just outrageous use and we think abuse of the state plane and the state tax dollars.
Hair-raising, if you will.
Yes. I want to turn it over to our research associate, Louise Lyle, to Saving Castro. Sorry, I didn't mean to skip you there. Who's going to walk through some of the notable round trips that the governor took on the state plane.
Thank you so much, Joanna. In addition to the frivolous use of the state plane, here are some of the highlights of round trips the governor took. Madison to Green Bay and back 14 times for $20,000. Madison to Appleton and back 11 times for $14,000. Madison to Wausau and back 6 times for $8,000. And of course, Madison to DC and back 5 times for $55,000. And then in addition to those, there are 2 round trips from Madison to Rhinelander 2 different times, and 6 separate trips that were a part of a leg on a broader trip. Now, Rhinelander is 30.6 miles away from Lincoln Hills, and ostensibly he would be using these trips to make a visit to Lincoln Hills. But of course we all know that he has never visited Lincoln Hills. Instead, he went to the World Muskie Hunt one time, and then in 2017 he visited Three Lakes High School Fab Lab, where he later returned in 2018 to record a campaign ad. So these are the priorities that the governor has used to use the state plane for many different ridiculous trips. And with that, I will...
Yeah, actually, I wanted to make one note, about the trips to D.C. Of the 5 total trips that Governor Walker made to D.C., one of them, he took the state plane from Madison out to D.C. to talk to the House Republican caucus about being big and bold in their agenda.
We've heard that in his campaign, haven't we?
We have. But he stayed in D.C. and then sent the state plane back with him. And another occasion, he had the state plane come and fetch himself and Mrs. Walker from D.C. to then return to Madison. So it's not just the total trips, but it seems more like a D.C. taxi service, we think.
And I think we've talked a lot about big numbers now. We're going to talk about some smaller numbers with Louise, our research associate.
So a lot of people fly in and out of D.C., but there are some flights that Walker has taken on the state plane that nobody would take. For example, Madison to Platteville, 63 miles. Madison to West Bend, 63 miles. Madison to Waukesha, 55 miles. Madison to Janesville, 39 miles. Oshkosh to Green Bay, 37 miles. Madison to Baraboo, 34 miles. Waukesha to Lake Geneva, 30 miles. Madison to Watertown, 30 miles. Green Bay to Shawano, 39 miles. Kenosha to Milwaukee, 24 miles. And Appleton to Green Bay, 24 miles. And some of these were multiple legs, like he did the flight multiple times on taxpayer dimes.
So we've given you sort of a taste of some of the research and the information that we found by scouring over Scott Walker's use of the state plane. We have created an online database that we would welcome everyone to take a look at. It can be found at onewisconsinnow.org/air. You can, take a look. We find that every time we look at these records, we see something new. So we would welcome you to take a look at it. Anything interesting, please, send our way. But we just really think it's just outrageous. Scott, I think you had some closing words that you wanted to say.
After 25 years in office and $100 million raised and spent as a political candidate in his run for governor, it's very clear that Scott Walker will say and do anything to get elected. And I think we have to add something to that. Scott Walker will say, do, and spend anything to get elected. The fact is this is not the guy from 2009 who rode around in his 1998 Saturn talking about ham sandwiches. This is a guy who just flew $818,000 worth of time over the course of 951 days, 114,000 miles on the state plane.
Well, and the last thing that I'll just add in is, at the same time this was being done, this governor was trying to force people who can't afford to buy food to get a drug test before they can get food stamps or health care. This is not the same Scott Walker from 8 years ago. This is a Scott Walker who's willing to misuse and abuse our state tax dollars to rehab his political image.
And I would like to point out, I meant to do this ahead of time, but we went in 15 minutes, so we'll take questions now.
Is there a way to categorize these trips between things that you guys feel he should not have gone on public dime at all versus if he'd taken a public car, it would have been just fine? Do you have any way to break down the total number of flights that way?
No, there's just so many flights. There's 869 flights, and one of the reasons we put the database, we have 2 different databases. One, you can search by the actual entire day's trip and each leg and how much it cost. But there's also individual days in there that next to it we have whatever notation Joanna, Savian, and Louise was able to find online to say what were some of the things he's doing. Because as we all know, sometimes we don't find out about what the governor's doing when the governor is doing it. So I don't have any kind of calculation. What I would say is, 869 flights over the course of 951 days.
Was it fair that the vast majority of these flights are situations where he was doing something that was state business? business and he should have taken a car instead?
I think absolutely you could argue that there are many of these trips which are state business. I would argue that many of these trips nobody has any business flying to. But that's not going to be my decision. That'll be up to, that'll be up to the taxpayers to make that decision.
How is his use of state planes any different than the use of state planes by Jim Doyle?
Well, let me note the gentleman you're speaking of who was last on the ballot 12 years ago. He sold 8 state planes when he became governor.
So in these flight records, did you also look at cabinet trips too, or did you just hone in on Walker's specifically?
Some of the records did indicate that cabinet members were with them, and you'll see, there was a flight manifest with with last names and first initials, and certainly there were some where it was cabinet on the road or something like that. But there were also where it was the first lady, again flying with him to take a walk. So there were some that were cabinet, but really it just was astounding. Again, just the sheer volume, and these were not largely cabinet trips.
Yeah, and I just want to I want to point out, because we have we've given you a lot of material, particularly in the in-flight magazine, which hats off to Louise who designed that for us. But one of the things you're going to see in there, for instance, when we're talking about Scott Walker being fetched after getting a haircut, after he had the state plane come fetch him in Milwaukee after he got a haircut, was that he has a tweet where he was going after Hillary Clinton, of course, in 2016 for allegedly getting a $600 haircut. Now, I don't know what Scott Walker was thinking when he decided to have the state plane come and get him after getting a haircut, but perhaps he suffered another cabinet injury which impaired his judgment on that day.
Are you guys filing any kinds of ethics complaints over here?
We're reviewing whether or not. There's so much material, so we're reviewing what may be improprieties particularly. But I do think, there's definitely things where you can take a look at something and say, for instance, the trip about Eau Claire. Doing that flight and having it come back so you can then go back up to a Donald Trump rally. For instance, I think that you could argue that, the haircut flight when he went up to meet with the NRA, was that necessarily appropriate, given that the NRA, as we all know, has been donating to him since his first successful campaign in 1993, and has given him to the tune of $3.5 million over the course of his 25 years in office.
Did he reimburse the state for any flight that you found?
That is an excellent question, because we pride ourselves on accuracy, and we probably, in the course of all the material and stuff, probably have one numerical mistake, because we know that some people are sometimes looking for mistakes, and we want to be inclusive and have something for everybody. But to your point, the total amount that he has billed.
So what you're seeing here with the total number is a net total. In fact, the total cost was $825,257.83. The reimbursed amount was $6,760.77. So yes, there was some reimbursement.
For what?
They note on the flight records for a particular day that there was a reimbursement to the state. We don't know for what purpose on those days and why not on other days.
Was
but
it just one day?
It was 3 or 4 days for a total, again, of out of $825,000, $6,700.
But again, so the NRA trip was not one of those, or the Trump one was not one of those.
No.
Do you have any examples of what
Here's what we can do. We can go back and find.
Yeah,
we'll go back and if you hit anybody who's interested in that, email Joanna.
It's in the database.
Okay.
Which days were reimbursed?
Oh, okay. There you go.
So again, there's an issue between whether a flight is extravagant for a taxpayer-paid flight when they could have taken a car. But that's not an ethics complaint. That's a
court of public opinion.
Sure. So, but in the sense that how many of these things are actually you take issue with him actually using taxpayer dollars for political purposes? Can you break that down?
I can't. I don't have. I do not have an accounting of all 869 flights. Which ones we think are, which ones are very clearly political, and which aren't.
But I've heard 2 examples. So far, you found 2 examples, or have you found a dozen?
I mean, I'll tell you what I'll do. We'll go and review that, and I'll let you know, because we have a list of a whole bunch of stuff we're throwing out. You know, there's a lot of information we're doing, but we can pick ones that we think are appropriate for sure. And obviously, you can go and take a look too. But I know you're asking my opinion of what I think about that.
What's your opinion for how far a flight? Like, what's the minimum distance?
I don't know. That's, you know, I mean, we knew we were going to get those kinds of questions. It's a totally fair question, but I can only say, like, flying from Appleton to Green Bay. I mean, I think, didn't you try and get that?
Yeah.
We tried to book that flight.
I actually tried to book like all these, like try to find a way that you could actually do it commercially, and there isn't really an option. You'd have to connect in Minneapolis and Chicago. I also asked a friend of mine who is training to be a pilot, and he said that a 25-mile flight on a like plane comparable to a state plane would take like 8 to 10 minutes. So like including like
25 minutes.
So a 25-mile flight, so that's comparable to some of the ones I read, would take about 8 to 10 minutes. That's just like a layman opinion. Yeah. I mean, sort of.
I mean, we were going to, you know, listen, we wanted to depict like the ridiculousness of this, and we were going to have, for instance, Annalise, our program director, was going to broadcast live starting out from Janesville Airport and get back in time before the end of this press conference, but knowing how the roads are, we weren't able to do it. We guess maybe if Governor Walker had to ride on the roads more and did less flying, he might be aware of the acute situation that we're having all around the state of Wisconsin.
You guys list here fewer than 100 miles, so I mean, is that maybe a good standard for where you can
Sure.
below that?
Absolutely. But I'm not going to say like there is never any reason why somebody, but the thing is, like, for instance, I'm guessing if we dug into the, you know, into the research more, you'd see like weekend trips, or like you said about, you know, like the Justice Crooks, when Justice Crooks passed away, it was a Saturday. The funeral was on a Saturday, and he flew to Green Bay on a Saturday and then got back here because that evening there was a Badger game in Madison. You know, how is that appropriate? But what would you call that? You know what I mean? How would you categorize that kind of abuse? Because it's clearly part of his duties, but somebody could also argue that, you know, the motorcade and stuff from the airport, that's a, you know, that connotes a political power, but coming back on it so that he can get to the Badger game, or doing that so that the time works out so he can go to the Badger game, would seem to be personally abusing.
Using state funds for his convenience and leisure.
There you go. You know, and again, like, let's put it in context. This guy is drug testing people to get their unemployment benefits. He's drug testing people to get food stamps. And he's drug testing for the first time in American history, attempting to drug test Medicaid recipients. And yet he has spent $818,000 of our money in order to fly around the state on the state plane in an attempt to rehab his political image. Don't take my words for it. These are his own words from just a few weeks ago.
How does flying to a funeral rehab his political image?
That's 1 out of 868 flights. Some of these we have included simply for outrage, because we're outraged.
Do you know how many of the short flights were part of different number, like individual legs? Where they
versus like he just went
here
like
to there to here to there.
I would say this: you're going to have to go to the database, and you can scrolls really quickly. Right off the main page, you can look and see like ones that, because we have like long leg ones. You know, like each day is like, so he went from Milwaukee to West Bend, or he went from Madison to West Bend to Green Bay to Wausau to Madison. That's all in one line. And you can see where he just did like, here, I just went to did this flight. That, you know, it was only a very short duration.
So, I mean,
and it's searchable.
Some of those shorter flights could be because he was doing multiple.
Oh, absolutely. No, without a doubt. No, he absolutely, I mean, listen, the guy has like been in office for 25 years. He is a very smart guy, and he knows what the most, you know, there are people who tell you the most important political resource is money. It is not. It is the principal's time. The most important resource in a political campaign is the principal's time. So him not having to, you know, dally with us commoners on the streets of Wisconsin and instead fly high above on a basically private jet is why he, you know, is a way to maximize his time, which is again all about political considerations, because he's trying to get all around the state. Because again, when he started this odyssey, this 951-day odyssey, his approval rating was at 37%. I don't think, you know, I don't think we've gotten our money's worth given where his polls are now.
But isn't that true if the most also his time?
No.
And that if he's going to do these kinds of events, which all governors have always done, you know,
Sure.
these
Yeah.
kinds of things, that there is value to taxpayers in having the governor flying from one place to another rather than driving, because when he's here, he can have cabinet meetings, he can find out what's going on in city agencies.
Absolutely.
I have two thoughts in response to that. One would be, really they're examples. One would be the back-to-back days in Eau Claire. We're not saying he can't go to a groundbreaking or go to a ceremony, but if or to a muskie hunt. But if day one to Eau Claire was to visit students at a school and day two was to do the groundbreaking, I can't imagine it's not within the governor's power to say, hey, can we put these together and save the taxpayers' expenses? Another example would be, and I didn't mention this before, but it falls into the same category, November 3rd of 2016, he flew to Kenosha and back from Madison to attend a private school's Veterans Day program, and then later was at a campaign rally in La Crosse. So that's another example where, yes, time is of the essence for anyone, right? But he's in a unique position to fly to and from Kenosha, and then be able to make it to a campaign rally later. That's another example to respond.
I would say this too also. The functions of a political campaign and the functions of being the governor are two entirely different things, because it's not necessarily how is it advantageous to Scott Walker performing his duties of executing our $80 billion state budget by flying to go meet people to muskie hunt and avoiding Lincoln Hills, or flying to, any number of these things. I get the PR part of it, but that's not necessarily the same kind of function. And when you're in a campaign, you're trying to talk to as many people as possible. That's why Walker's raised and spent $100 million over the last 9 years in order to do that. So that's why I would push back with that as well. All right, if there's nothing else, we'll wrap up. If anybody has any questions afterwards, and feel free to use that material in any way you want to use it. It's for your reproduction and that sort of thing. Go nuts. And thank you again for coming. And, it's unfortunate we have to come here, especially on such a muggy day, but you can get out of here and it's 15 degrees cooler. Thanks.
Thanks.